A warm welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's day 27. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. Here are the headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky tells the Italian parliament his country is on the brink of surviving its war with Russian forces.
A Russian missile slams into a psychiatric hospital in the Black Sea port of Mykolaiv.
Plus, a look into how economic sanctions imposed by the EU over Russia's invasion of Ukraine impact on Belarus, Russia's main European ally.
Welcome again. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky continues his addresses to lawmakers around the world. Today, he addressed the Italian parliament, calling on lawmakers to freeze all assets of the Russian elite and declare a full trade embargo, including oil, telling them freeze all their property, accounts and yachts, freeze all the assets of those who have influence, let them use it for peace. Support sanctions against Russia, a full trade embargo, starting with oil.
The Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, responding to President Zelensky's address, says Ukraine has offered heroic resistance to the Russian invasion. In his words, the arrogance of the Russian government has collided with the dignity of the Ukrainian people, who have managed to curb Moscow's expansionist aims and impose a huge cost on the invading army. Here's on day 27 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed the Italian parliament, saying he talked to the Pope, suggesting the Vatican has a mediating role to play and that Ukraine is on the brink of surviving its war with Russia. He asked the Italian parliament to back more sanctions against Russia. The Italian Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, says Italy would support Kiev's bid to join the European Union and that the arrogance of the Russian government has collided with the dignity of the Ukrainian people. Meanwhile, negotiation is still top on the mind of President Zelensky, who said it would be impossible to negotiate an end to the war in his country without a meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin.
I believe that until such a time as we have a meeting with the presidents of the Russian Federation, you cannot truly understand what they are prepared to do in order to stop the war, and what they are prepared to do if we are not ready for this or that compromise.
The Ukrainian president also said that Kiev's compromises at peace talks with Russia will be put to a nationwide referendum in Ukraine. Zelensky said Ukraine was not accepted by NATO and therefore needed to remain calm and seek other security guarantees, which could involve changes to Ukraine's constitution and existing laws. Today, the Russian Defense Ministry released video footage which it said showed a military supply convoy driving through an area in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. The Defense Ministry said damaged or abandoned Ukrainian military vehicles were seen on the roadside. Meanwhile, satellite images released recently show thick black smoke and heavily damaged buildings in urban areas across Ukraine. The images show damage caused by Russian attacks in the besieged southern port city of Mariupol and nearby Talakivka, Irpin, and Hostomel, northwest of Kiev, and Cherniv, and the outlying village of Novozelvika, near the Russian and Belarusian borders. Other images also show Russian ground forces on standby in Dublin, Belarus. Ukraine said on Monday it would not obey ultimatums from Russia after Moscow demanded it stopped defending Mariupol, where hundreds of thousands of civilians are suffering from Russian bombardments, leaving their city in ruins. And U.S. President Joe Biden and leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Italy on Monday discussed Russia's brutal tactics in Ukraine, including its attacks on civilians. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters that they also reviewed recent diplomatic efforts in support of Ukraine's efforts to reach a ceasefire.
During this call with President Macron of France, Chancellor Scholz of Germany, Prime Minister Draghi of Italy, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom, they discussed their serious concerns about Russia's brutal tactics in Ukraine, including its attacks on civilians. They underscored their continued support for Ukraine, including by providing security assistance to the brave Ukrainians who are defending their country from Russian aggression, and humanitarian assistance to the millions of Ukrainians who have fled the violence. They also reviewed recent diplomatic efforts in support of Ukraine's effort to reach a ceasefire.
The call comes ahead of Biden's trip to Europe later this week, where he will meet with NATO allies, G7 leaders, and European Union leaders. Meanwhile, a super yacht linked to Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich docked in the Turkish tourist resort of Marmaris today, a port source said, a day after another of his yachts arrived in nearby Bodrum, also in the country's southwest. The Eclipse, which is one of the world's biggest at 162.5 meters long and sails under a Bermuda flag, arrived in Marmaris after cruising southeast of the Greek islands of Crete and Rhodes, according to marine traffic data. The data also showed the super yacht Solaris remained moored in Bodrum, some 80 kilometers away, having skirted the waters of European Union countries that have sanctioned the oligarch over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But in Kiev, a 35-hour-long curfew is still in place, with various deserted and empty streets. The mayor of Kiev on Monday announced a reinforced curfew in the Ukrainian capital from 8 p.m. until 7 a.m. on Wednesday. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said shops, pharmacies and petrol stations would not open on Tuesday. Parts of the city have come under fire repeatedly from Russian forces. Ukraine says that at least 10 hospitals have been completely destroyed and fierce fighting is continuing around Kharkiv and Mariupol.
U.S. President Joe Biden says Russia's false accusations that Kyiv has biological and chemical weapons illustrate that Russian President Vladimir Putin is considering using them himself in his war against Ukraine. During a business roundtable event and without citing evidence, President Biden said that Putin's back is against the war, and now he's talking about false new flags and setting up, including asserting that America has biological as well as chemical weapons in Europe, which is simply not true. The Russian embassy in Washington did not immediately respond to the comment, but the remarks echo prior comments by officials in Washington and allied countries who have accused Russia of spreading an unproven claim that Ukraine had a biological weapons program as a possible prelude to potentially launching its own biological or chemical attacks.
In response to his aggression, there has been, we presented a united front throughout NATO and in the Pacific. The Quad is, with the possible exception of India being somewhat shaky on some of this, but Japan has been extremely strong, so has Australia, in terms of dealing with Putin's aggression. We presented a united front throughout NATO and the Pacific, and you did a hell of a lot to help us impose sanctions and incur real cost on the Russian economy. And we're seeing now that it mattered. It was really important what you all did, not every one of you, but I'm not suggesting you all had to, but those of you who did step up, it made a big difference. And I'm personally, as president, grateful for that. And so his back is against the wall, and he's talking about new false flags he's setting up, including he's asserting that we, America, have biological as well as chemical weapons in Europe. Simply not true. I guarantee you. They're also suggesting that Ukraine has biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine. That's a clear sign he's considering using both of those. He's already used chemical weapons in the past, and we should be careful what's about to come. He knows there'll be severe consequences because of the united NATO front, but the point is, it's real. And what I want to mention very quickly with you all is one of the tools he's most likely to use, in my view, in our view, is cyber attacks. They have a very sophisticated cyber capability. I've had, as they say in southern Delaware, where they
Meanwhile, Japan has reacted angrily after Russia withdrew from peace treaty talks with Japan and froze joint economic projects related to the disputed Kuril Islands because of sanctions imposed by Tokyo over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia and Japan have still not formally ended World War II hostilities because of the standoff over islands just off Japan's northernmost island of Hokkaido, known in Russia as the Kurils and in Japan as the Northern Territories. The islands were seized by the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. Well, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida added that Japan's attitude towards seeking a peace treaty were unchanged, and it had protested the Russian move.
On February 24th, 2022 was when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of neighboring Ukraine, with fighting effects in cities like Kyiv, Mariupol, Kharkiv. And the exact number of civilians and military personnel killed in the conflict is difficult to clarify. But civil society groups who normally keep a record of how many have died are not able to access certain areas because they're dangerous. Ukraine's State Emergency Service said on March 2nd more than 2,000 civilians have died, but has not released any figures since.
However, information released by Russia's defense ministry says 498 soldiers have lost their lives in what the Kremlin calls its special military operations. This information was released on the 2nd of March, and there has been no update since. Also, Russia's defense ministry the same day had previously claimed that more than 2,800 Ukrainian soldiers and paramilitary fighters had been killed and around 3,700 wounded. But the 13th of March, Ukraine announced that at least 1,300 of its soldiers have been killed so far in the conflict.
March 19 now, the UN's Human Rights Office announced on Saturday 847 civilians had died in Ukraine since February 24, including 155 women, 155 men, 119 women, 21 boys and 7 girls. But in a statement, the Human Rights Office said it believes the actual figures are considerably higher. Last week, an advisor to the city's mayor said he believes up to 20,000 people may have been killed. Ukraine's military claims that over 14,000 Russian troops have been killed so far in Moscow's invasion of the country.
And it was also claimed Moscow has lost a huge amount of military equipment, including over 1,000 armored troop carriers, 60 tanks, over 100 fighter jets and helicopters. Western intelligence sources have also suggested that around 7,000 troops have been killed and between 14,000 to 21,000 more have been injured.
Intelligence arm of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry claims among that the Russian military dead are 5 army generals and a senior naval officer, including Major General Vitaly Gerasimov, chief of staff to the 41st Army, who was killed outside the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv.
Joining us to talk more about the cost of this war is Brigadier General Saleh Baba, who is retired, and also the president and founder, White Ink Institute for Strategy, Education and Research. He joins us from Abuja. Thank you and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Just a little correction that the name is Brigadier General Saleh Bala, retired, not Baba. Thank you.
Thank you. Tell us, what is the cost of the war to a country like Russia?
The cost of the war is horrendous, and it is not something that one can calculate to bits of dollars and cents or rubles or naira and kobo, especially when it is ongoing. It can just be some kind of estimation. But in this conversation, I will establish a fact that war itself is a tragedy. War is chaos. War is insane. It is something at every level of humanity that requires to be eliminated. But then, war is inevitable. When discussing the losses of this war, it would be foolhardy to only focus on square on what losses on this war is to Russia. Because fundamentally, I am in a disposition to view this war from its human losses. And if we are to look at war and the efforts to prevent it, even as early as the establishment of the League of Nations in 1920, after the World War, the very aim of this global organization is to mitigate suffering on human beings and to eliminate to the most extent and reduce suffering in war. And very much too, that is what has established, what has caused the establishment of the Red Cross in 1863. So when we are looking at this war from a human disposition, it is important that we view that the sense of victory in war is relative. If on Ukraine today we are talking about 10 million refugees, 10 million and about 4 million internally displaced people, I think it is much more than talking about the hundreds of tanks, aircrafts, or the rubble that Russia is losing, as much as this is very, very important. But if we want to count on costs, we should also look at the implications of this war from a global perspective, because the world today is very much about the human. So we must and we should be viewing this war from what suffering it is causing primarily to the people of Ukraine and how its spread will be to the global community.
Yes, but even with that, you talk about the role of peace institutes and organizations, but sadly, the war continues, the invasion still continues. And we've also heard, you know, from different sides, if it's Ukraine or Russia, they're previously claiming that, you know, these forces have been lost and these are the people as well. I mean, do we know what the true figures are, which are also important in this war? And this is for the aftermath, if anyone is going to be taken to, you know, the courts, for instance, in terms of keeping tabs with what it is we're witnessing with this invasion.
Yeah, it is really very, very interesting that we've gone through the wars, the invasion of Iraq in Kuwait, and what has called Operation Desert Storm to remove Iraqi forces from Kuwait. And for the first time, we have seen a live transmission of war to the world, and people are open to make their own decisions. But here we are in a war where there is a mass conspiracy of the West, and indeed Russia, where there is so much of mitigation of access to true information about really what is going. There is so much demonization of Russia, and then within Russia itself, there is so much control of information on the war that is going on. So it is very, very difficult from a standpoint of a strategist that is outside the region of the war to really make informed and cogent conclusions and statements over the state of the war. And it is a cry that the global press, for the huge responsibility and trust that is invested in the global press, it seems to have bought into the Western and NATO strategic communication or propaganda by itself, so to speak, about the reality of this war. You hardly, even while I was doing research on this war, and you try to find out about Ukrainian military casualty on this war, except for the statistics that you have rolled out, it is very, very difficult from open source to really have a credible information about how many troops and what assets the Ukrainian military is losing. Because once you go to search that, it only tells you about the civilian casualty, which very much is a reality, is a sad reality to which every human being should be concerned about. But then, on also the Russian side, what is really happening across the Russian border? Are there displaced persons? Are there attacks into Russia? Are those happening? You hardly can find any information on that. But we have to square up and, as human beings, to be very, very concerned about the effects of this crisis to the human community, which is very clear, present, and dangerous.
Indeed, Brigadier General, and we have been looking at that, and we'll be looking at that further on in the program. But looking at how far back this war is costing Russia militarily as well as economically and financially, as we suggested, troops lost over 100 tanks, aircraft, helicopters, and research shows that on the 4th day of this invasion, direct losses from military action cost the Russian Federation $7 billion, including $4.2 billion cost of lost machinery. When you're looking at the total cost so far, how much exactly do you think that Russia is investing in this war in Ukraine?
When Russia goes to war with Ukraine, it very much knows that it is very much a proxy war to which it is drawing its traditional adversary, which is the West. That is the NATO coalition. So if you are speaking about a war involving Russia and Ukraine, it is very much more appropriate to speak to it about the NATO-Russian war. For as much as you do not have NATO boots on the ground, but you very much have support deployments, including cyber forces, to which the president of the United States is accusing Russia of likely likely deploying. Because right now we have deployment of Patriot missiles in Latvia, in Poland, and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. And these are helping a lot. And this is what has brought Russia to the use of supersonic missiles in this warfare, which otherwise would have remained at the level of conventionality. And this is a very, very dangerous approach, because one will think that the major approach to dealing with this war is establishing negotiation. But you can see that in all the rhetorics of the NATO leaders, it is in order to goad Russia into escalation. And the battleground, indeed, for this war, the ground on which these elephants will contest is Ukraine. So
sadly,
the loss, sadly, the loss will be Ukraine and the larger world. We all know how many Nigerians, in fact, 3,500 Nigerians had to be evacuated out of that. So if you are even speaking about the global implications, I continually try to draw us to the global implications of this warfare.
Brigadier General,
we're already suffering an energy crisis. There's going to be a food crisis because Ukraine and Russia alone are responsible.
It's a lot of impact, and it's almost as if, you know, with all that is happening and the propaganda, we cannot actually count all of the costs, you know, in this war. So many factors to look at.
Absolutely.
But we'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Brigadier General Saleh Bala, also President, founder, Whiting Institute for Strategy, Education Research. Thank you so much for joining us on the program
today. Thank you very much, and I hope it goes well for humanity. Thank you.
Indeed.
Some of the issues he raised are issues that we have already been talking about on the program, and we continue to raise them. Well, coming up after the break, identifying deep fakes in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Our panel of discussants will be joining our digital correspondent, Victor Matthias, in our digital studio. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A senior White House cybersecurity official Anne Neuberger has reported that important U.S. companies that provide critical infrastructure should improve their cyber defensive posture because of ongoing digital threats from Russia. Neuberger said the U.S. government has seen preparatory Russian hacking activity aimed at numerous U.S. companies, but is still not certain that such attacks will occur.
The White House also published a written statement Monday from President Joe Biden where he warned that Moscow may lash out with cyber attacks because of the unprecedented economic costs imposed on Russia.
We've previously warned about the potential for Russia to conduct cyber attacks against the United States, including as a response to the unprecedented economic costs that the U.S. and allies and partners impose in response to Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. Today, we are reiterating those warnings, and we're doing so based on evolving threat intelligence that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in the United States. To be clear, there is no certainty there will be a cyber incident on critical infrastructure. So why am I here? Because this is a call to action and a call to responsibility for all of us. We have not yet attributed that attack, but we're carefully looking at it because, as you noted, of the impact not only in Ukraine, but also in satellite communication systems in Europe as well. There is no evidence of any specific cyber attack that we're anticipating for. There is some preparatory activity that we're seeing, and that is what we shared in a classified context with companies who we thought might be affected. And then we're lifting up a broader awareness here in this warning. Major?
Well, videos of Russia's Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky have been used to create deepfakes with a message that favors the adversary. They are not true, but they still quickly spread online. Manipulated videos designed to look like someone said or did something they did not, known as deepfakes, have targeted politicians for years, with higher stakes amid Russia's war in Ukraine. However, such videos could have a swift and devastating impact on those directly involved in the conflict. Let's now head to our digital studio, where our digital correspondent Victor Mathias takes us through the dangers of cyber attacks and the deep fakes since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Victor?
Hello, Millicent. Of course, again, welcome to this side of the divide. It's digital studio, and of course, I have with me Adedeji. He's joining us via Zoom from Lagos, as well as Nkem Agunwash is the project coordinator Africa at Witness. Thank you guys for joining us today on the program. Of course, I know Adedeji is a gentleman, so he would go with the saying, of course, ladies first. So Nkem kicks out the conversation for us. Let's take, first of all, look at the challenges being raised by deepfakes at the moment.
Thanks, Matthias.
Sure.
We used to consider deepfakes as an emerging technology or a niche technology, right? Something that is just limited to a few people with those specialized skills. But it really isn't anymore. And this is the very reason why my organization Witness has been preparing for new forms of media manipulation and what we call deepfakes, right? Because the proliferation of deepfakes technology has made it easy to create highly convincing manipulated media. And this is a dangerous trend because this technology is now readily available on mobile apps and do not require advanced skills to make. Essentially, deepfakes give wings to the dissemination of malicious disinformation, which is what we see in the Ukrainian conflict, and essentially allows people to invent their own facts or alternative facts like we see, and wild exaggerations. So these have grave human rights implications and can be devastating for the civilian population, particularly in conflict situations as we have seen in Ukraine and in other conflicts across the world. I also would want to point at this point, when we think, especially now that the conversation around deepfakes has become more mainstream, there is a tendency to think of it as a negative thing or as solely a negative thing. it does present opportunities. We've seen how deepfakes has been used to advance societal causes, but we must prioritize the threats that it poses. And it's important that we start talking about this and begin to prefer global solutions that would address this.
That was actually going to be like my next line of questioning, because I'm thinking, what could the solution be?
You know, like experts really have argued that deepfakes, and even the deepfakes of Zelensky and of Putin, is really just a tip of the iceberg of what is possible with deepfakes in the context of the Ukrainian conflict and conflicts in general, and even in elections and in cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And so many have tried to detect deepfakes, even in this instance of Zelensky, by pointing out his face was stoic, or his accent was off, or he didn't blink naturally, right? But I can assure you that trying to detect deepfakes with the naked eye would amount to speculation. There really is no way to be 100% certain. The technology is fast evolving and increasing in its believability. So what we need is a corresponding investment in detection tools and ensuring that these tools are readily available to those who need them the most, including newsrooms, journalists, human rights defenders, and activists. The investment in authenticity infrastructure and the conversation around truth infrastructure must be a widespread effort driven by government, tech platforms themselves, and the general public, because the challenge of disinformation is really like a collective challenge. So recently, the Coalition for Content, Provenance, and Authenticity published its specification. And this makes it possible for any tool or device to add features that track the source and history of digital media. So this means that the end user, you and I, can know when a piece of media content has been manipulated. This is a landmark document because prior to this, there has been no ethical standards. There's really been no standards at all, no guidelines that the tech industry would abide by. This is not a binding document. It's an essential document that creates a pathway to tracing the truth. And Witness has influenced this at an early stage to empower critical voices globally and bolster a human rights framework. Because when we begin to talk about detection tools, oftentimes these conversations are concentrated in the global north. And this means that the global south, including Africa, is left behind. And that would just perpetuate the systemic inequalities that abound today. And so we need more voices to push for the adoption of these specifications in the design, development, and distribution.
Yeah, so I was already thinking, it's good to be mentioned of some of these things, especially this document that you said it was just published, because I'm thinking, when deepfakes are created by the talented and skillful people who, create these fakes, the first platform they use to share these is the social media. So Facebook, YouTube, and whatnot. What role do you think these big tech can play? Apart from, of course, the investment that you spoke about?
Yes, there's a huge role that they can play and should play, because social media platforms have consistently underinvested in responding to human rights challenges in countries around the world where people rely on their services. Social media has become like a helpline where people are able to galvanize support and do a lot of things. But we've seen how social media platforms have failed in Ethiopia, in Syria, Myanmar. And so the Ukrainian conflict is really not an exception. However, I must say that they have shown some bold moves, and I've seen that they try to curtail the spread of disinformation, such as labeling or blocking of state-sponsored or state-affiliated media and other safety measures. But this is not sufficient. These are reactive efforts, which means that they will continue to play catch-up while the civilian population is trapped in the middle. So I feel like this is a time where the tech industry as a whole, particularly tech platforms, social media, the big names, must begin to reflect and decide what is priority to them. we have seen them consistently prioritize profit, prioritize the investors and the shareholders over the communities that rely on them. But they have a responsibility to protect human rights. And there are some things that can be done, right? As simple as in-app reverse image search.
So pretty much, pretty much maybe improve their algorithms to be able to track some of these things. But let me just hold you there for a bit and bring Adedoyin into the conversation. Adedoyin, you just heard the statement from the White House. They are putting in place measures. They're being, careful. They believe Russia is at any point in time, going to launch a cyber attack. How possible is this, and to what end can this be happening at this point in time?
Okay, thank you very much. The first thing we should understand is cyber warfare has always been one of the major tools of Russia. Up until this invasion, you would agree with me that I think in the last few months, there have been consistent cyber attacks on major infrastructure in Ukraine. I think that those are one of the pointers. I mean, the frequency of attacks against Ukraine were one of the few pointers that a number of intelligence agencies were looking at to determine Russia's actions. So for Russia, that they're under pressure with the war in Ukraine, might not also be risking a full-blown war with a country like America. So a softer way to deal with America is to attack their critical infrastructure. And I think those are one of the things that the president of Russia had actually mentioned when he was talking about that there will be consequences for those that support Ukraine. So whatever those consequences are, I bet that cybersecurity is on that list. And one of the things that I feel that the West, America and the allies are trying to do is to drum up support and let people be aware that these are some of the things that will likely happen in the coming days or in the coming months. So definitely, I think the idea and the notice is quite valid for people to pay attention to the fact that Russia could definitely attack critical infrastructures in the US.
I know most of the countries in Africa, have not really taken a stand, as to, where they are, in all of this. But what should, just again for being, on the safe side, what should everyone be doing right now that, America is already saying that it could happen? What should everyone else be doing to ensure that their critical infrastructure, is protected and is safe from invasion in the cyberspace?
Okay, let me quickly mention one thing that is also evolving, which everybody should pay attention to, is the fact that while Russia wants to launch cyber attacks, there are also individual actors across the world that are launching counter-attacks against Russia itself. And for example, the Anonymous group has been quite active in the last few weeks, hacking into several, even as much as hacking into TV stations in Russia and all that. Even the glitch that happened during the Russian president's campaign recently. Well, some said it's probably due to attempt attacking the broadcast. So all these are happening. And one of the drawbacks to this problem is when you call everybody to a fight, you can't expect what the fallout will be. So people are creating tools to attack Russia today. They are creating tools to penetrate systems. Recently, I think about 2 days ago, I was reading like a report from an anonymous member saying that they could get into phones and send out messages to phones once they have a phone number. So what it means is that when all this is over, the problem is that there might be too many tools that will be available for people to use it for criminal intents. Do you understand? Some of these tools might be created by activists, but then we would always see some of these things cascading into the dark web for people to use for malicious purposes. So for Africa, I think the challenge would always be that we need to raise our stake. We need to raise our cybersecurity awareness measures. We need to let people understand that these are the consequences of what is happening across the world and educate people, because education, like what the American government is doing, is a form of education to their citizens that, look, this is likely what would happen. So you need to pay attention to this thing. And I think governments across Africa also need to do things like that, meaning you need to inform your citizens that these are some of the things that we need to do. So the various information agencies of government across Africa need to do more by educating people. And also we need to invest in more in cybersecurity, definitely, and have what we call like a national plan, national cybersecurity defense plan, so that when things like this happen, there's always a response. And I think it's important also, like the Americans are trying to do, which is to bring in the private sector.
All right.
Let's build that robust synergy between government and private sector to make things work out.
All right. Just in winding down, Kem, in 30 seconds, what would be the impact, of deepfakes, especially to Ukrainians and Russians that are cut out right now, from everything, globally?
Unfortunately, what it does is it creates a liar's dividend. So essentially, this gives plausibility to false information and directly undermines the truth. And the truth, yeah. So just the truth documented by frontline documenters who are risking their lives to capture authentic, fact-based evidence of human rights violations. So this directly undermines their efforts.
All right, I have to say thank you to you and Kem, as well as Adedoyin, both of you, for joining us today on the program and sharing your thoughts on cybersecurity as well, as deepfakes. But of course, this is a conversation that will continue. Of course, we'll have you guys back again, when developments actually, come up again. But thanks for sharing your thoughts. Well, Amarachi, Millicent, this is it from this end of the divide. Of course, you heard from them how things are going and, how things can be done to, prevent everyone from being affected. So I'll hand it over back to you guys at this point.
Thanks, Victor Mathias. They are digital correspondent. Of course, you can follow the discussions there online on our social media platforms. Still ahead, when brothers unite, a Russian artist and a Ukrainian come together to promote peace and unity through a giant work of art. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine from the African standpoint. A global health agency, the World Health Organization's Regional Europe Director, Hans Kluge, today visited Moldova, where he called for urgent assistance to handle the influx of refugees from Ukraine.
Moldova's health minister, Alla Namarenko, says over 331,000 refugees had fled to Moldova since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, calling the situation a humanitarian crisis without any precedent. More than 100,000 refugees have stayed in the country, many of them children, women and elderly people.
With the number of refugees now, about half of them, about 500,000, require support for mental health disorders due to the conflict, and about 30,000 with severe mental diseases. The needs of the refugees are many, and main health problems on arrival from Ukraine, what we are seeing at the reception centers is fever, diarrhea, hypothermia, upper respiratory tract infections, cardiac arrest, mental and emotional distress.
And doctors have been clearing rubble from a psychiatric hospital in the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Mykolaiv after it was reportedly hit by a Russian missile. State emergency services say 3 people died on Monday. 1 person was injured after several missiles were fired into the city. Under normal circumstances, there would have been around 50 people in the wing of the hospital that was hit, but the staff moved them away 20 minutes before the bomb struck.
Ukrainian military has warned the public of more indiscriminate Russian shelling of critical infrastructure, and the government has appealed to Russia to allow humanitarian supplies into Mariupol and to let desperate civilians out. UN data says more than 3.5 million people have fled abroad from Ukraine, leaving Eastern Europe scrambling to provide them with care, schools and jobs. About 10 million people have been displaced by the fighting, which is almost a quarter of the country's population.
Joining us now is expert in international relations, especially conflict prevention, management and resolution. Charles Chukwunari is also a humanitarian aid worker with interests in international humanitarian and human rights law. He joins us from Calgary, Canada. Charles, thank you for joining us on the program. It does appear that Russian forces and missiles are now targeted at civilians. As a humanitarian aid worker yourself, how does it feel watching the aftermath on TV and seeing the devastation caused by these airstrikes?
Amarachi, thank you for having me, and thank you for providing this opportunity so that people will know what is going on in Ukraine. I cry, I weep, I can't sleep at night. I can't imagine the suffering. No, there's no sane human being that can sleep and be happy with what is going on in Ukraine. Nature does not authorize us to destroy one another. Nature does not authorize humans to do what is going on right now.
And according to the UN, Charles, a third of Ukraine's population has already been displaced by this conflict, probably already left the country. And there are fears that that number could rise. I mean, the war is still going on. What are your worst fears about the impact that this fighting would have on Ukraine?
It can only be imagined. You see, as of the last 3.5 million refugees fled Ukraine already. And if up to 3.5 billion, this is a US estimate, fled the country already, you can imagine the population of internally displaced people. And when you are talking about refugees and internally displaced people, you are looking at mostly women and children, vulnerable. You will see a family of 8 reduced to 3. And when you speak to them, they tell you, I lost my mother, I lost my father. These are looking at orphans. They're looking at people that do not have shelter. They're looking at people that do not have food to eat. They're looking at, and this is the winter. It's in the winter. No food, no gas, no electricity, no shelter. And you're looking at the vulnerable women and children because the men are at war. So someone has to look after them. And then there is you know, what pains me most is that having access to these vulnerable people, I'm talking about the internally displaced people, I'm not even talking about the refugees who are in Poland, who are in Romania, who have gone as far as Germany and other places. How about internally displaced people? They need drugs, they need food, they need hospitals to care for the wounded, and that is not happening.
Mr. Chukwunari, if we look at what the players, those involved, Ukraine and then Russia on the other hand, and we look at how the West is trying to get involved, we look at some of the mediators in the negotiations, I mean, do you see this conflict ending soon? And what would you recommend perhaps as a solution?
You see, what has happened in Ukraine, we need to understand the epistemological issues. Ukraine is just a frontier battlefront for East and Western ideologies. Liberal democracy versus totalitarian state. More economic freedom, more political freedom versus a very strong state. So this is a conflict of ideologies. It's an ideological warfare. So it's going to be intractable, and there will be no winner. Russia cannot win. And the West are not, I can't say I'm very impressed with the engagement of the West because they had opportunity to stop this war. If the West were in Russia before, were in Ukraine, Russia wouldn't have come in. Now that Russia is there already, for the West to come in, they don't really want to do that. So what extent can they go? They don't want to get involved in the fight. So the people in Russia, in Ukraine, may have misread or misjudged the international how nations behave in international relations. The West is not ready to go and fight, and if the West is not ready to go and fight, there will be no deterrence for Russia. So Russia will continue, but Russia will never win because you cannot win an ideological warfare with the barrel of a gun. This is a contest of ideologies, contest by the best solution is for the people in Ukraine now realizing that they miscalculated the response of NATO, to forget about, okay, what is the bottom line for Russia? Russia is asking that Ukraine will not join NATO. Fine. For me, there must be a win-win situation. Russia cannot, they have deployed a lot of resources, they are debilitating sanctions, they are putting a lot. They can't just go out like that. So I would want a win-win situation. What is Russia asking for? Russia is asking for constitutional reforms in Ukraine so that they will be non-aligned. And so they don't want Russia to join NATO. So, sorry, they don't want Ukraine to join NATO. NATO should accept, Ukraine should accept it, knowing that the West is not ready to risk a third world war. So the options left to NATO and the West, led by US, is to make up their mind. Make up their mind. There must be an impartial arbiter. The US cannot do it. China cannot do it. A non-aligned country, an impartial arbiter, should broker peace between Ukraine and Russia, where it will be a win-win situation. As it is now, Ukraine cannot join NATO.
Charles, this conversation it sounds like it's just picking up, and it's becoming more interesting. We'll have to invite you again to finish your thoughts on this, and of course we have many more questions to ask. But thank you, appreciate your time being with us today, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Charles Chukwunaru, international affairs analyst, joining us from Calgary, Canada.
It's also interesting who that impartial arbiter would be.
Exactly, maybe Africa this time. Now, as we end the program, a Russian artist and Ukrainian owner of a villa complex in the Indonesian resort island of Bali have come together to promote peace and unity through a giant work of art. That piece of calligraphy, spinning 960 square miles across rooftops of 9 buildings, spells out United World in 6 languages: Russian, Ukrainian, English, Chinese, French and Indonesian.
Lampas, who has been in Bali since December, said the idea was developed with a group of Ukrainian friends before the war started. But now the work has taken on even more meaning. The 30-year-old Lampas, who describes his style as calligraphy tourism and says it encompasses modern calligraphy and elements of street art, spent 3 weeks creating the work.
Pretty interesting calligraphy.
Simply amazing.
Well, thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
I'm Millicent Nwaka. Have a good evening.